Margaret Thompson had worked at Buckingham Palace for 23 years. She started as a young woman fresh out of university, eager to serve the royal family. Over the years, she had seen many changes within the palace walls, but nothing had prepared her for what she would discover on that cold October morning. As the head of the Royal Wardrobe Department, Margaret knew every piece of clothing that belonged to the royal family. She had a special connection to the late Queen Elizabeth's personal items. The Queen had always been kind to her, often stopping to chat about the history behind certain dresses or asking about Margaret's family. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Margaret arrived at the palace at 7 o'clock sharp, just as she had done for over 2 decades. She made her way through the familiar corridors, greeting other staff members with warm smiles. The palace felt different since the Queen's passing 6 months earlier. There was a sadness that seemed to hang in the air, but life had to continue. Margaret's first task of the day was to check on the Queen's wedding dress. It was kept in a special climate-controlled room, carefully preserved for future generations. The dress was not just a piece of clothing. It was a symbol of love, tradition, and British history. Made of silk and decorated with thousands of pearls and crystals, it had taken months to create back in 1947. As Margaret entered the preservation room, she immediately noticed something was wrong. The glass case that usually housed the wedding dress was empty. Her heart began to race as she looked around the room, hoping she had made a mistake. But there was no mistake. The Queen's wedding dress was gone. Margaret's hands trembled as she checked the security logs. According to the records, only 3 people had access to this room: herself, the palace curator, and senior members of the royal family. She quickly called the curator, Mr. James Wilson, who confirmed he had not touched the dress in weeks. The realization hit Margaret like a cold wave. Someone from the royal family had taken the dress without following proper procedures. This was not just against protocol. It felt like a betrayal of the Queen's memory. Margaret had promised herself that she would protect the Queen's belongings, and now she felt like she had failed. Margaret spent the next hour making discreet inquiries. She spoke with security guards and other staff members, but no one had seen anything unusual. The dress had simply vanished. As she walked through the palace corridors, Margaret felt a growing sense of urgency. She needed to find that dress and ensure it was being treated with the respect it deserved. During her lunch break, Margaret sat in the staff cafeteria, lost in thought. Her colleague Sarah noticed her distress and sat down beside her. Margaret had known Sarah for 15 years, and she was one of the few people Margaret trusted completely. "Something's bothering you," Sarah said gently. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Margaret hesitated for a moment, then decided to confide in her friend. She told Sarah about the missing wedding dress and her fears about what might have happened to it. Sarah listened carefully, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. "You have to report this," Sarah said firmly. "That dress is part of British heritage. It belongs in the royal collection, not in someone's private possession." But Margaret knew it wasn't that simple. Accusing a member of the royal family of taking something without permission could end her career. She had worked too hard and too long to throw it all away on what might be a misunderstanding, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. That evening, Margaret stayed late at the palace, hoping to find more clues. She reviewed security footage from the past week, looking for any signs of unusual activity near the preservation room. Hours passed, and her eyes grew tired from staring at the screens. Just as she was about to give up for the night, Margaret saw something that made her blood run cold. On the footage from 3 days earlier, she could clearly see Queen Camilla entering the preservation room late at night. She was alone, and she stayed inside for nearly an hour. When she left, she was carrying a large garment bag. Margaret's mind raced with questions. Why would Queen Camilla take the dress in secret? What could she possibly want with it? And most importantly, where was the dress now? As Margaret gathered her things to leave the palace, she made a decision that would change everything. She could not let this slide. The Queen's wedding dress was too important to disappear without explanation. Tomorrow she would have to do something she had never imagined in her 23 years of service. She would have to confront Queen Camilla directly. The walk home that night felt longer than usual. Margaret's apartment was small but comfortable, filled with photographs and mementos from her years at the palace. As she prepared for bed, she looked at a framed picture of herself with the late Queen, taken during a staff appreciation event 5 years earlier. I won't let you down, Margaret whispered to the photograph. I promise I'll find your dress and bring it home where it belongs. Margaret barely slept that night. She kept thinking about the conversation she would have to have with Queen Camilla. How do you approach the queen consort and accuse her of taking something that doesn't belong to her? The very thought made Margaret's stomach turn with anxiety. But Margaret had made up her mind. Some things were more important than her job security or her comfort. The Queen's wedding dress represented decades of love, duty, and service to the British people. It deserved to be protected and preserved for future generations, not hidden away in someone's private collection. As dawn broke over London, Margaret knew that this day would be unlike any other in her long career at Buckingham Palace. She was about to embark on a mission that would test her courage, her loyalty, and her commitment to doing what was right, no matter the personal cost. Margaret arrived at the palace the next morning with a heavy heart and a determined mind. She had spent most of the night planning what she would say to Queen Camilla. Every word had to be carefully chosen. One wrong phrase could end her career and destroy her reputation forever. The morning routine felt different. Every task seemed to take longer as Margaret's mind wandered to the conversation she needed to have. She checked her appearance in the mirror multiple times, making sure her uniform was perfect. If she was going to confront royalty, she wanted to look professional and respectful. By 10 o'clock, Margaret had learned that Queen Camilla was in her private study, reviewing correspondence. This was typically the best time to approach her, as she was usually in a good mood after her morning tea. Margaret took a deep breath and made her way through the palace corridors. The walk to Queen Camilla's study felt like the longest journey of Margaret's life. Her palms were sweating and her heart was beating so fast she was sure everyone could hear it. She passed other staff members who smiled and nodded, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside Margaret's mind. When Margaret reached the study, she knocked gently on the door. Queen Camilla's voice called out, inviting her to enter. Margaret stepped inside, and for a moment she forgot how to speak. The room was elegant and warm, with afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows. "Margaret, how lovely to see you," Queen Camilla said with a smile. "What brings you here today?" Margaret had rehearsed this moment dozens of times, but suddenly her prepared words seemed to vanish. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to find the courage to speak. "Your Majesty," Margaret began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to speak with you about something very important." Queen Camilla noticed the serious tone and set down her papers. "Of course, please sit down. You look quite troubled." Margaret remained standing, feeling that what she had to say required formality. "Your Majesty, the Queen's wedding dress is missing from the preservation room. I've been responsible for its care since Her late Majesty's passing, and I need to know where it is." The color drained from Queen Camilla's face. For a moment, the room was completely silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Margaret could see various emotions crossing the Queen Consort's face. Surprise, guilt, and something that looked like defiance. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "Margaret," Queen Camilla said carefully, but her voice had lost its warmth. Margaret's hands were shaking, but she pressed on. "Your Majesty, I've seen the security footage. 3 nights ago, you entered the preservation room and left with a garment bag. The dress has been missing since then." Queen Camilla stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Are you accusing me of stealing, Margaret? Do you understand the gravity of what you're suggesting?" "I'm not accusing you of stealing, Your Majesty," Margaret replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "But that dress is part of the royal collection. It's a piece of British history and it needs to be properly preserved and protected." Queen Camilla began pacing around the room, her heels clicking sharply against the wooden floor. "You have no idea what you're talking about. That dress? It's more complicated than you understand." Margaret felt a surge of courage. "Then please help me understand, Your Majesty. Where is the Queen's wedding dress?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Queen Camilla stopped pacing and turned to face Margaret directly. Her expression was a mixture of anger and something else that Margaret couldn't quite identify. "You want to know where it is?" Queen Camilla asked, her voice rising slightly. "It's in my private apartments, and that's where it's going to stay." Margaret felt her legs go weak, but she forced herself to remain standing. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, that dress belongs to the British people. It's part of the Royal Heritage Collection." "Don't lecture me about royal heritage," Queen Camilla snapped. "I've been part of this family longer than you've been working here. I know exactly what that dress represents. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Margaret realized she was in deeper water than she had anticipated. This wasn't just about a missing dress. There were emotions and complications she hadn't considered. "Your Majesty," Margaret said more gently, "I understand this must be a difficult time for the entire royal family. But the Queen specifically asked me to take care of her personal items. I made a promise to her." Queen Camilla's expression softened slightly at the mention of the late Queen. "A promise," she repeated quietly. "Yes, I suppose we all made promises to her." Margaret sensed an opening and took a small step forward. "The Queen loved that dress. She told me stories about her wedding day, about how nervous she was, about how the silk felt against her skin. She wanted it preserved so that future generations could see it and understand that love story." Tears began to form in Queen Camilla's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't understand what that dress means? Then please help me understand why you took it," Margaret pleaded. "If there's a problem with how it was being stored, we can fix it. If you need it for something specific, we can arrange that properly." Queen Camilla walked to the window and stared out at the palace gardens. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "It's not about the storage, Margaret. It's about what that dress represents to me personally." Margaret waited patiently, sensing that Queen Camilla was struggling with something deeper than she had initially realized. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken emotions and complex family dynamics. "That dress," Queen Camilla continued, still looking out the window, "reminds everyone of the woman I could never replace. Every time someone sees it, they remember her wedding day, her perfect marriage, her beloved status with the British people." Margaret began to understand the real issue. This wasn't about preserving history. It was about jealousy, insecurity, and the impossible task of following in the footsteps of one of the most beloved monarchs in British history. "Your Majesty," Margaret said softly, "removing the dress won't change people's memories or feelings. But keeping it hidden away dishonors both you and the late Queen." Queen Camilla turned around, her eyes flashing with anger once again. "Don't you dare tell me what honors or dishonors anyone. You're a servant, Margaret. You work for us, not the other way around." The words hit Margaret like a physical blow, but she refused to back down. "You're right, Your Majesty. I am a servant. But I serve the crown, the institution, and the history that comes with it. That includes protecting items that belong to the British people." The confrontation had reached a boiling point, and Margaret knew there was no going back now. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence after Queen Camilla's harsh words. Margaret felt the sting of being reminded of her place, but she also felt something else, a fierce determination to protect what she believed was right. She had come too far to back down now. Queen Camilla seemed to realize her words had been unnecessarily cruel. She sat back down in her chair and rubbed her temples, looking suddenly tired and vulnerable. "Margaret," she said quietly, "you don't understand the pressure I live under every single day. Everything I do is compared to her. Every speech, every appearance, every decision. Do you know what it's like to be constantly measured against a ghost?" Margaret had never seen this side of Queen Camilla before. Behind the royal facade was a woman struggling with insecurities and the weight of impossible expectations. For a moment, Margaret felt sympathy for her. "Your Majesty, I can't imagine how difficult that must be," Margaret said honestly. "But hiding the Queen's wedding dress won't solve those problems. If anything, it might make them worse." Queen Camilla looked up at Margaret with tired eyes. "How could it possibly make things worse?" Margaret chose her words carefully. "When people find out the dress is missing, and they will find out eventually, they'll want to know why. The story will become about the dress disappearing, rather than about preserving the Queen's memory." "Who says anyone needs to find out?" Queen Camilla asked, but her voice lacked conviction. "Your Majesty, the dress is scheduled to be part of a memorial exhibition next month. Hundreds of people are expecting to see it. The media will be there. When it's not on display, questions will be asked." Queen Camilla's face went pale. In her emotional state, she had forgotten about the upcoming exhibition. The memorial display was meant to honor the late Queen's life and legacy, and her wedding dress was supposed to be the centerpiece. I hadn't thought about the exhibition," Queen Camilla admitted. Margaret sensed this was her opportunity to reach Queen Camilla on a human level. "Your Majesty, may I speak freely?" Queen Camilla nodded, though she looked apprehensive. The late Queen spoke about you more often than you might realize, Margaret said, especially in her final months. She worried about how difficult this transition would be for you. She knew you would face criticism and comparisons. Queen Camilla's eyes filled with tears again. She said that? She did. And she also said something else that I think you need to hear. Margaret paused, remembering the conversation clearly. She said that you had a strength she admired. She said you had survived things that would have broken other people, and that you would bring your own special qualities to the role. She really said that? Queen Camilla's voice was barely a whisper. Margaret nodded. She respected you, Your Majesty. But more than that, she wanted you to succeed. Taking her wedding dress and hiding it away. That's not the action of someone who respects her memory. Queen Camilla stood up and began pacing again. But this time her movements seemed less agitated and more thoughtful. I don't know why I took it, she said finally. I was walking past the preservation room that night and I went in. When I saw the dress, all I could think about was how perfect everything was for her. Her wedding, her marriage, her reign. Everything I'm not. Margaret felt her heart soften toward Queen Camilla. Your Majesty, perfection is often an illusion. The Queen had her struggles too. Her marriage wasn't always perfect, and she made mistakes during her reign. But what made her beloved wasn't perfection. It was her dedication to doing what was right even when it was difficult. And what's right in this situation? Queen Camilla asked. Returning the dress to where it belongs, Margaret said without hesitation. Not just physically, but treating it with the honor it deserves. That dress represents a love story that inspired millions of people. It should be shared, not hidden. Queen Camilla was quiet for a long moment, considering Margaret's words. And if I refuse? Margaret had dreaded this question, but she had prepared for it. Then I'll have to report the theft to palace security and ultimately to the authorities outside the palace. The word theft hung between them like a sword. Queen Camilla's expression hardened. You would really do that? You would humiliate me publicly over a dress? I would report the truth, Margaret replied firmly. That a priceless piece of British heritage has been removed from its proper place without authorization. I wouldn't use the word theft, but others might. Queen Camilla sank back into her chair, looking defeated. My reputation would be destroyed. The media would have a field day with this story. Margaret felt no satisfaction in seeing Queen Camilla's distress, but she couldn't back down now. It doesn't have to come to that, Your Majesty. We can fix this quietly. Return the dress and no one else needs to know what happened. Except you'll know, Queen Camilla said bitterly. You'll always know that I'm the queen consort who stole her predecessor's wedding dress out of jealousy. Margaret considered this carefully. What I'll know is that you're human, and that when faced with a difficult situation, you chose to do the right thing. That's what the late queen would have wanted. Queen Camilla wiped her eyes with a tissue from her desk. You really think returning the dress will solve anything? I think it's a start, Margaret said honestly. But more than that, I think you need to find a way to honor the Queen's memory while still creating your own legacy. Hiding her dress won't help with either of those goals. Queen Camilla was quiet for several minutes, staring out the window at the palace gardens where tourists were taking photographs. Finally, she turned back to Margaret. If I return the dress, will you promise me something? Margaret was cautious but curious. What would you like me to promise, Your Majesty? Help me understand how to honor her memory properly. You knew her better than most of the staff. You understood what mattered to her. I want to do right by her legacy, but I don't know how. Margaret felt a wave of relief wash over her. This was the breakthrough she had hoped for. I would be honored to help with that, Your Majesty. Queen Camilla stood up and walked to her desk. She opened a drawer and pulled out a key. The dress is in my private dressing room. It's hanging in the wardrobe, still in the preservation bag. Margaret felt her knees go weak with relief. Thank you, Your Majesty. Should I collect it now? Not yet, Queen Camilla said. First, I want to see it one more time. I want to understand what made it so special to her. Will you come with me and tell me about it? Margaret nodded, realizing that this request was about more than just returning a dress. It was about two women finding a way to honor the memory of someone they both cared about, despite their complicated feelings and circumstances. Margaret followed Queen Camilla through the palace corridors toward the private royal apartments. The walk felt completely different from her earlier journey to the study. The tension was still there, but it had changed from confrontational to something more collaborative. Margaret found herself seeing Queen Camilla in a new light. not as an adversary, but as someone struggling with enormous expectations and personal insecurities. The private royal apartments were areas of the palace that Margaret rarely entered. These were the personal spaces where the royal family lived their private lives, away from the public ceremonies and official duties. As they walked, Queen Camilla seemed lost in thought, occasionally glancing at Margaret as if she was still deciding whether to trust her. When they reached Queen Camilla's private dressing room, she hesitated with her hand on the door handle. "Before we go in," she said quietly, "I want you to know that I've never done anything like this before." Taking the dress, it wasn't planned. It was an emotional reaction to something I've been struggling with for months. Margaret nodded understandingly. "Your Majesty, we all have moments when our emotions get the better of us. What matters is how we handle the situation afterward." Queen Camilla opened the door, and they stepped into an elegant dressing room lined with wardrobes and mirrors. The room smelled faintly of lavender and roses. In the far corner, hanging alone in a glass-fronted wardrobe, was the late Queen's wedding dress. Even from across the room, the dress was breathtaking. The ivory silk seemed to glow in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. The intricate beadwork and embroidery were visible even from a distance, and the train spread out like a work of art. Queen Camilla approached the wardrobe slowly, as if the dress might disappear if she moved too quickly. "I've been looking at it every day since I brought it here," she admitted, trying to understand what made her so special. Margaret joined her at the wardrobe. "May I tell you what the Queen told me about this dress?" Queen Camilla nodded, her eyes fixed on the gown. "She said that when she first put it on for her final fitting, she felt like she was wearing a dream," Margaret began. "But she also said she was terrified. She was only 21 years old, about to marry the heir to the throne, and she had no idea what kind of life she was stepping into." "She was scared?" Queen Camilla asked, surprised. "Absolutely terrified," Margaret confirmed. "She told me that the night before her wedding, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about all the women who would come after her, wondering if they would face the same fears and pressures." Queen Camilla turned to look at Margaret. She thought about the women who would come after her? Often, especially in her later years. She worried about the wives and future queens who would have to follow in her footsteps. She said the hardest part of being queen wasn't the public duties or the formal ceremonies. It was living up to people's expectations while staying true to yourself. Queen Camilla was quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. She never seemed scared or uncertain in public. That was one of her greatest talents, Margaret said. She learned early in her reign that showing fear or uncertainty in public could shake people's confidence in the monarchy. But privately, she questioned herself constantly. She told me that she used to practice her speeches in front of this dress because it reminded her of the promises she made on her wedding day. "What promises?" Queen Camilla asked. Margaret smiled, remembering the conversation clearly. Not just the wedding vows to Prince Philip, but the promise she made to herself to serve the British people with dignity and grace, no matter how difficult it became. Queen Camilla opened the wardrobe and gently touched the fabric of the dress. "The silk is so delicate. How did it survive all these years?" "Very careful preservation," Margaret replied. But also the Queen only wore it once. She said she wanted it to remain exactly as it was on her wedding day, so that future generations could see what love looked like when she was young. "Love," Queen Camilla repeated softly. "Do you think she was truly happy in her marriage?" Margaret considered the question carefully. "I think she was as happy as anyone can be in a marriage lived entirely in the public eye. She and Prince Philip had their challenges, but they also had a deep respect and affection for each other that lasted 73 years. Queen Camilla continued to examine the dress, noting the intricate details of the beadwork and the way the fabric caught the light. "I keep thinking about my own wedding," she said. "It was so different from this. Smaller, quieter, with so much controversy surrounding it." Margaret remembered Queen Camilla's wedding day well. It had been a civil ceremony followed by a blessing, and while it was elegant and meaningful, it couldn't compare to the fairy tale grandeur of the late Queen's 1947 wedding. "Different doesn't mean less meaningful," Margaret said gently. "Your wedding represented something important too. The idea that love can overcome obstacles and that second chances are possible." Queen Camilla looked surprised. "You really think that?" "I know the Queen thought that," Margaret replied. "She told me she was proud of you for finding happiness despite all the challenges you faced. She said it showed courage. Tears began to form in Queen Camilla's eyes again. I wish she had told me that directly. Maybe she tried in her own way, Margaret suggested. The Queen wasn't always good at expressing personal emotions directly, but her actions spoke loudly. She welcomed you into the family, gave you important roles and responsibilities, and defended you when others criticized. Queen Camilla carefully closed the wardrobe and turned to face Margaret fully. What should I do with the dress now? I know I need to return it, but I also know that seeing it in the exhibition next month is going to be difficult for me. Margaret had been thinking about this problem. Your Majesty, what if instead of trying to compete with the late Queen's memory, you found a way to honor it while also establishing your own legacy? What do you mean? The memorial exhibition is about celebrating the Queen's entire life, not just her wedding day. What if you gave a speech at the opening, talking about what her marriage meant to the country and how it inspired your own approach to royal duty? Queen Camilla considered this idea. You think people would accept that coming from me? I think people would respect your honesty and your willingness to honor her memory publicly, Margaret said. And it would show that you're secure enough in your own role to celebrate her achievements. Queen Camilla walked to the window and looked out at the palace gardens. You know, when I took the dress, I thought if people couldn't see it, they might stop comparing me to her. But you're right, hiding it just makes the problem worse. The comparisons will probably never stop completely, Margaret said honestly. But you can change how you respond to them. Instead of seeing the late Queen as competition, you could see her as a teacher. A teacher, Queen Camilla mused. What do you think she would teach me if she were here now? Margaret smiled. I think she would tell you that being queen isn't about being perfect. It's about being dedicated, consistent, and always putting the country's needs before your own comfort. And I think she would tell you that you already have those qualities. Queen Camilla wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. All right, Margaret. Let's return this dress to where it belongs. And then I want you to help me plan how to honor her memory properly at the exhibition. As they prepared to carefully remove the dress from the wardrobe, Margaret felt a sense of accomplishment. She had not only recovered the missing dress but had also helped Queen Camilla find a path forward that honored both the past and the future. The process of returning the Queen's wedding dress to its proper place was more complex than Margaret had anticipated. Every step had to be done with extreme care to ensure the delicate fabric wasn't damaged. Queen Camilla insisted on helping personally, which surprised Margaret, but also showed how seriously she was taking this responsibility. Together, they carefully lifted the dress from the wardrobe, supporting it at multiple points to distribute the weight evenly. The silk was indeed fragile, and Margaret could see why the Queen had been so protective of it during her lifetime. As they carried it through the palace corridors, Margaret noticed that Queen Camilla seemed more relaxed than she had been in months. This feels right, Queen Camilla said quietly as they walked. I should have done this days ago. When they reached the preservation room, Margaret was relieved to see that the climate control systems were working perfectly. The temperature and humidity levels were exactly where they needed to be for the long-term preservation of historical textiles. She and Queen Camilla worked together to position the dress in its protective case, adjusting it carefully so that every detail was visible. It really is magnificent, Queen Camilla said, stepping back to admire the dress in its proper setting. No wonder she was so proud of it. Margaret began the process of updating the security logs and preservation records. Everything had to be documented properly to maintain the chain of custody for such an important historical artifact. As she worked, she noticed Queen Camilla studying the dress intently, as if she was trying to memorize every detail. Your Majesty, Margaret said gently, would you like me to arrange for you to visit the dress regularly? As Queen Consort, you have every right to access the royal collection whenever you wish. Queen Camilla considered this offer. I think I would like that. Not to take it again, she added quickly, but to understand it better. Maybe you could tell me more about the other items in the collection too. This request pleased Margaret enormously. It showed that Queen Camilla was genuinely interested in preserving and understanding royal history, rather than seeing it as competition or a burden. Over the next several days, Margaret and Queen Camilla worked together to plan the memorial exhibition. They met every afternoon in Queen Camilla's study, reviewing display plans and discussing how to present the late Queen's life story in a way that was both respectful and engaging for visitors. Margaret was impressed. By Queen Camilla's attention to detail and her genuine desire to get everything right, she asked thoughtful questions about the Queen's personality, her private interests, and the stories behind various artifacts in the collection. "Tell me about this photograph," Queen Camilla said during one of their planning sessions, pointing to a picture of the Queen with her corgis. "That was taken during her 70th birthday celebration," Margaret replied. She was so happy that day because all of her dogs were behaving perfectly for the photographer. She said it was the first time in 20 years that all the corgis had sat still at the same time. Queen Camilla laughed. "That sounds like her. She always said the dogs were better behaved than most politicians." These afternoon sessions became a healing process for both women. Margaret got to share her memories of the Queen with someone who truly wanted to understand her legacy. Queen Camilla got to learn about the woman she had succeeded, not as a competitor but as a predecessor whose experiences could guide her own reign. As the exhibition opening approached, Queen Camilla became nervous about the speech she had agreed to give. Margaret had helped her write it, focusing on themes of continuity, respect for tradition, and hope for the future. "What if people think I'm not qualified to talk about her?" Queen Camilla asked during their final planning session. "Your Majesty, you knew her personally for over 20 years. Margaret replied. "You were part of the family. You watched her work and learned from her example. That makes you very qualified to speak about her legacy." The day before the exhibition opening, Margaret did a final check of all the displays. The Queen's wedding dress was the centerpiece, positioned so that visitors could see it from multiple angles. The lighting was perfect, highlighting the intricate beadwork and the flowing lines of the silk. As Margaret stood in the exhibition hall, she thought about the journey that had brought them to this point. What had started as a confrontation about a missing dress had become an opportunity for understanding and growth. Queen Camilla had not only returned the dress but had become actively involved in preserving and sharing the late Queen's legacy. Sarah, Margaret's friend from the cafeteria, joined her in the exhibition hall. "Everything looks beautiful," she said. "You should be proud of what you've accomplished here." Margaret smiled. "It wasn't just me. Queen Camilla worked incredibly hard on this exhibition. I think people are going to be surprised by how thoughtful and respectful it is." That evening, Margaret received an unexpected invitation to have tea with Queen Camilla in her private apartments. When she arrived, she found Queen Camilla looking nervous but determined. "I wanted to thank you," Queen Camilla said as they sat down, "not just for helping with the exhibition but for confronting me about the dress. It was the right thing to do, even though it was difficult." Margaret was touched by this acknowledgement. "Your Majesty, it was difficult for both of us, but I'm glad we found a way to work through it together." Queen Camilla poured tea for both of them, a simple gesture that somehow felt significant. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said about seeing the Queen as a teacher rather than competition. I realize now that I was so focused on not measuring up to her that I forgot to learn from her example." Margaret sipped her tea thoughtfully. "What do you think she would want you to learn from her?" "Patience, I think," Queen Camilla replied, "and the importance of putting duty before personal feelings. When I took that dress, I was acting on emotion rather than thinking about what was best for the institution. We all make mistakes when we're hurting," Margaret said gently. "What matters is how we correct them." Queen Camilla set down her teacup and looked directly at Margaret. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you think I can ever be the kind of queen that she was?" Margaret considered the question carefully. "Your Majesty, I don't think you should try to be the same kind of queen she was. You're a different person, with different strengths and experiences. The country needs you to be the best version of yourself, not a copy of someone else." "But what if my best isn't good enough?" Queen Camilla asked, voicing the fear that had been haunting her for months. "Your Majesty, in the past week you've shown courage in admitting your mistake, wisdom in seeking to understand the Queen's legacy, and dedication in working to honor her memory properly. Those are exactly the qualities a good queen needs." Queen Camilla seemed to consider this carefully. "You know, when I was looking at that dress every day, I kept thinking about the young woman who wore it. She had no idea what the next 70 years would bring, but she put it on anyway and made promises she intended to keep. And she kept them," Margaret said. "Through good times and difficult times, she kept her promises to the country and to herself." "I want to make my own promises," Queen Camilla said suddenly. "Not to replace hers, but to add to them. I want to promise that I'll always try to honor her memory, while building something meaningful of my own." Margaret felt a surge of respect for Queen Camilla. I think that's exactly what she would want you to do. As their tea ended, Queen Camilla walked Margaret to the door. Tomorrow is going to be challenging, she said, speaking about her in front of all those people, knowing that some of them still wish she was here instead of me. Your Majesty, Margaret said, some people will always wish things were different, but many others are ready to support you and see what you can accomplish. Focus on them and on doing what you know is right. Queen Camilla smiled, and for the first time since Margaret had known her, it seemed completely genuine. Thank you, Margaret, for everything. I hope you'll continue to help me understand how to honor the past while building the future. As Margaret walked home that evening, she felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond recovering a missing dress. She had helped two people, herself and Queen Camilla, find a way to honor the late Queen's memory while moving forward into an uncertain but hopeful future. The morning of the memorial exhibition opening dawned bright and clear. Margaret arrived at the palace earlier than usual, wanting to do one final check of all the displays before the guests arrived. The exhibition hall looked magnificent, with the late Queen's wedding dress as the stunning centerpiece, surrounded by photographs, personal items, and carefully chosen artifacts that told the story of her remarkable life. As Margaret walked through the hall, she noticed Queen Camilla standing alone in front of the wedding dress display. She was dressed elegantly in navy blue, and she appeared calm despite the importance of the day ahead. Good morning, Your Majesty, Margaret said softly, not wanting to startle her. Queen Camilla turned with a smile. Good morning, Margaret. I wanted to see everything one more time before the guests arrive. It's even more beautiful than I imagined it would be. Margaret joined her in front of the dress display. How are you feeling about your speech? Nervous, Queen Camilla admitted honestly, but also ready. I keep thinking about what you said about making my own promises. Today feels like the right time to do that publicly. The first guests began arriving an hour later. Margaret watched from the side of the room as dignitaries, royal family members, and invited guests moved through the exhibition. She was pleased to see how engaged everyone seemed, taking time to read the descriptions and truly absorb the stories being told. When it came time for Queen Camilla's speech, the room fell silent. Margaret held her breath, hoping that all their planning and preparation would pay off. Queen Camilla approached the podium with confidence, and when she began to speak, her voice was clear and strong. Today we gather to celebrate the life and legacy of Queen Elizabeth II, Queen Camilla began. Behind me stands her wedding dress, a symbol not just of a beautiful ceremony, but of the promises she made on that November day in 1947. Promises to her husband, to her country, and to herself. Margaret felt a surge of pride as Queen Camilla continued her speech, weaving together personal memories with historical significance. She spoke about the Queen's dedication to duty, her love of family, and her unwavering commitment to the British people. The Queen once told me, Queen Camilla continued, that being royal wasn't about wearing beautiful clothes or living in palaces. It was about understanding that you have been given a platform to serve others, and using that platform responsibly every single day. The audience was completely captivated. Margaret could see people nodding and even wiping away tears as Queen Camilla shared intimate insights about the late Queen's character and values. As I stand before you today, Queen Camilla said, approaching the end of her speech, I want to make my own promises. I promise to honor the Queen's memory by continuing her work of service. I promise to learn from her example while bringing my own experiences and perspectives to this role. And I promise to always remember that this position is not about personal glory, but about serving something greater than ourselves. The applause that followed was genuine and heartfelt. Margaret watched as guests approached Queen Camilla after the speech, offering congratulations and sharing their own memories of the late Queen. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from formal ceremony to warm celebration of a life well lived. Throughout the day, Margaret noticed how naturally Queen Camilla interacted with the guests. She listened to their stories, answered their questions about the exhibits, and seemed genuinely moved by their memories of the late Queen. It was clear that something had changed in Queen Camilla's approach to her role. Later that afternoon, as the last guests were leaving, Margaret found herself alone with Queen Camilla in front of the wedding dress display once again. That was a beautiful speech. Your Majesty, Margaret said. I think the Queen would have been very proud. Queen Camilla looked at the dress thoughtfully. Do you know what's strange? Looking at it now, I don't feel jealous or intimidated anymore. I feel inspired. That young woman who wore this dress had no idea what challenges she would face. But she faced them with grace and determination. And now it's your turn to face your own challenges, Margaret said. Yes, Queen Camilla agreed. But I feel better prepared now. Not because I'm trying to be her, but because I understand what she was really about. Service, dedication, and always putting the country first. As they stood there together, Margaret reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. What had begun as a crisis, a missing dress and a confrontation, had become an opportunity for growth and understanding. Your Majesty, Margaret said, I want you to know that working with you on this exhibition has been one of the most meaningful experiences of my career. You've shown tremendous courage and wisdom. Queen Camilla turned to face Margaret fully. And you, Margaret, have shown me what true loyalty means. Not blind obedience, but the courage to speak up when something important is at stake. The Queen was lucky to have someone like you protecting her legacy. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in their own thoughts about the future. The wedding dress seemed to glow in the late afternoon light, a reminder of promises kept and dreams fulfilled. What happens now? Queen Camilla asked. Margaret smiled. Now we continue the work. We preserve the past, we serve the present, and we prepare for the future. Together. As they left the exhibition hall that evening, Margaret felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The Queen's wedding dress was safe. The memorial exhibition was a success, and most importantly, Queen Camilla had found her own path forward as a leader. Walking home through the London streets, Margaret thought about the late Queen and the promises she had made all those years ago. Those promises had been kept, not just by the Queen herself, but by all the people who had supported her along the way. Now it was time for a new generation to make their own promises and find their own ways to serve. The wedding dress would continue to inspire visitors for generations to come, but its most important lesson had already been learned by the woman who would wear the crown next. Margaret knew that the late Queen's legacy was in good hands, and that gave her peace as she looked toward the future. In the end, it hadn't been about the dress at all. It had been about understanding what it represented: love, commitment, service, and the courage to keep promises even when keeping them was difficult. Those values would continue long after the silk had faded and the pearls had lost their luster. They lived on in the people who chose to serve others, and in the quiet moments when ordinary people decided to do extraordinary things for the good of something greater than themselves.